Welcome everybody to the Community Technical Assistance Center webinar series on family alignment. We're very excited to have special guest speakers today from the Child Welfare Organizing Project. And before we hand it off to them, I just wanted to orient you to a little bit to our series and to the webinar. Today's webinar is specifically talking about working with child welfare involved families within the mental health system. As many of you know, or in case anybody hasn't participated, this is part of a about 6 or 7 month series really focusing on working and collaborating with families. We did a series of 2 or 3 webinars since in February and March, or earlier February and beginning of March, really focusing on those first 30 days of service, the importance of engagement and really collaborating and supporting families to really start with a really solid foundation around providing clinical services and ensuring the best possible outcomes and engagement. About 2 weeks ago, we also started talking with everybody around engaging caregivers, specifically within the mental health system, and really focused on some key core strategies about how to work and collaborate with caregivers, and really thinking through how best can we involve them in the services and support the children that we all work with. And then today, we really wanted to take the time to focus a little bit differently, and since so many of us are really working with families that are child welfare involved, we thought it was also important to spend some time talking about the specific needs, challenges, and concerns that many of you may have in working with those families and how best to approach engaging them as well. We hope to follow this up with a consultation webinar in about 2 weeks, and I'll give information at the end of today's webinar about when that is. You also should have received some email announcements about that, and that's an opportunity to really kind of talk with the presenters around any questions, any implementation concerns, any challenges in implementing some of these engagement strategies. So you'll have that information at the end of the webinar. For those of you that are new to our webinar system, just as a reminder, all participants are muted. If you have a question for us, or you want to provide a comment or answer to some of the discussion questions that our presenters are going to pose to you, just use that chat box on the right-hand side. There's a little empty box at the bottom where you can type in your question or comment. Make sure the drop-down, you hit send to all panelists and submit to us, and that way we can see your questions as they come in. We'll do our best to answer them during the webinar. If not, we'll hold them for a Q&A time towards the end. As a reminder, the recording and the slides will be posted on the ctacny.com website soon after the webinar. You can also access all our previous webinar recordings and slides from the series at ctacny.com as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Sandra Killett, head of the Child Welfare Organizing Project, and she'll introduce herself and one of her peers that works with her as well.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be here with the Community Technical Assistance Center. My name is Sandra Killett. I'm the Executive Director of Child Welfare Organizing Project. And before I proceed further, I'm going to have a parent organizer introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Celestina Martinez, and I'm a parent organizer at Child Welfare Organizing Project.
So as we will continue on with the first slide, in which we will review the agenda. So on the agenda, you have a CWOP background history, a CWOP perspective in working with families and systems, challenges that child welfare involved families have, the protective factors, parents' rights, supports, engagement strategies, and of course resource and tools. And the really good part is the question and answers at the end, so we'll make sure we leave enough time to answer any questions you might have. So what I'm going to do for you right now, and again, this is Sandra, I'm going to take you through the background of Child Welfare Organizing Project. Child Welfare Organizing Project is a nonprofit organization of parents and families to transform the child welfare system. Child Welfare Organizing Project began as a research question, And the research question was, what voice do parents have in the child welfare system? So if you can think back to the early 1990s, if you know anything about child welfare or you've been introduced to it recently, you know that there was no voice of parents in the child welfare system. So in the 1990s, through Hunter College School of Social Work and Research, they decided to explore this question about the voice of parents. So since this question has been answered, CWOP has made many strides to increase the voice of parents within and outside of the child welfare system. For example, we have parent advocates that participate in family team conferences within the child welfare system. Next slide. We also have parents that go out and present to various legal entities and universities. So the answer to the question is not a final answer to what voice, but it is I believe, a beginning answer to the question. So we've made many strides. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Celestina to talk to you about CWOP's perspective in working with families and systems.
Hello, this is Celestina. So CWOP working with families, first we come in and allow parents to and respect them to express anything and everything that is going on in the process within the child welfare involvement. They're included in the process of being honest, open, and empathetic. A lot of the times they don't understand what exactly is going on, so they come for help, for resources, and understanding what is going on, and they have support to speak with their agency to help them understand what exactly is going on in their involvement with their family. And we also give out resources in places that we know of that may help them with services that they might need to be referred to, and help the family understand that they want help.
So as Celestina stated, you know, again, just respect for the family's voice, and all those points that we made, we feel that lends respect to the family's voice. So what is CWOP goals and objectives in the work that we do? Our key targets for system change include working to bring about the following, and that is to continue to increase the proportion of public child welfare funding and realigning, actually, funding to the child welfare system, allocating funding for prevention services and preservation. And I always like to add intervention, right? So immediately, like before you get to prevention, we know that families just have needs. I mean, all families do, and particularly the families that we encounter who come in contact with the child welfare system are often families that are under the poverty measures and living in certain communities that don't have all of the resources that they need. Our objective is to acknowledge and develop a conscious strategy to address the counteract of widespread influence of systemic racism in the child welfare system. This, we know there's disproportionality across the country in the child welfare system. We know particularly in New York, there's a high rate, almost 88% of the children and families are affected by the child welfare system. That is a number that no one should be willing to live with, and certainly at Child Welfare Organizing Project, the parents affected are aware of this, and we're not willing to live with that. We want an increase in the indicators of parent involvement in the child welfare system service planning. You heard me say that the question is still unanswered. Well, there's some movement in the rates of parents participating in service plan reviews, parent-child visitation requirements, and we're having input and say about the quality of what even those those visits will look like for families, whether or not the family team conferences are truly family team conferences. And by that I mean, you know, when you come into a conference, if the conference is heavily weighed by those who have called the actual meeting, then by no means does the family or the parent's voice get heard, right? So we say that making sure that the family know that they can have as many people as they like attend those conferences, as much support, and anyone who can lend voice to who they are as a family is what's needed in the balance of those conferences. We will continue to mobilize parents who are affected and not affected to transform the child welfare system. We also, you know, believe that the system should respond to families as humanly as possible before and after any contact, right? Families are a nucleus. Families are challenging. Families have all types of issues. Families are different and unique in every way, everyone you come in contact with. And we serve to make sure that that is known, and thereby you would have to treat families humanly. We have parents who are serving as consultants and certain oversight roles at the Administration for Children's Services, which is New York City's child welfare system. And actually, it's not nearly enough. And, you know, across the country, that needs to happen on a consistent basis where, you know, those affected are sitting at advisory boards. And I mean truly sitting at advisory boards and having their voice heard. And when you decide to establish those type of advisories or consultants with parents, they must be at the head of the table. And when I say at the head of the table, I mean at the beginning stages, not necessarily seated at the head. But, you know, anything that you're doing, families and parents and youth must be included from the ground up. It cannot be a system that's established and then inviting families in. We want to continue to exert and direct influence on public policy and development of any of the systems, bringing attention to the various models of legal representation. The legal representation models that we know are beneficial to the families are the interdisciplinary models. That means there's a legal, you know, there's an attorney, there's a social worker, and there might be a parent advocate, veteran parent, parent mentor. And I give you those different names because in different jurisdictions they have different titles. But for us, for parents, they pretty much mean the same thing. And we would say that they should have their voice in a true, authentic way to help the family and advocate for the family. We also by no means think that the issues that face caseworkers are not important, right? We know that they're important. We know that, you know, having caseloads, you know, which are smaller in size will help caseworkers pay attention to the families that really, really need to have that in-depth and intense work done with them. And that's why we strive to say that there should be more preventive services and interventions as opposed to, you know, having families come into the system, because we don't believe that if you treat everyone like they're an emergency, that you'll have the availability of a caseworker to work with every family, because every situation is not an emergency. We also know that once the family comes in contact with the child welfare system and there is court intervention, that some of the things that can delay a family's reunification and or moving the family forward in their planning process is the court system and the overload within the court system, the time frame it takes to have your case heard, the time frame it takes to have you come back to court for any issues. They're very long and drawn out, which means that the family will be separated for a much longer time. These things are important to families that are affected by the system because first and foremost, you have the traumatization of children and families, and the traumatization doesn't just happen with the court proceedings being long or, you know, the inability of the caseworker to give you all of what you need and attention you need as a family. It starts with that first removal of separating a child from its natural nucleus, right? That in itself is trauma. That's the beginning process for us as parents as we identify it. We also know that in communities across the country that services and certain providers are essential, right? You know, believe it or not, you might be in a community where they absolutely do not have mental health service providers, right? And wow, you know, you're like, no service providers, but that hinders the process of family planning and reunification and the caseworker's job, because then you're looking for services for the family, and those services might be in another borough. And for some instances, your locations, you call them counties. But for New York, you might have to travel to a different borough in order to get the services that you need. And what does that look like for a family and for a parent? So we make sure that we voice those concerns, and we make sure that everyone understands why there is a need for parent advocates, right? Because in that moment, there is a need to help the caseworker, the mental health provider, whoever is involved with that family to understand that, you know, families are not, it's not that they don't want to be engaged. That's far from the truth, right? But there are some really things that really interrupt their engagement in the process. And it might be essentially just what I just said, you know, having to travel for 2 hours to see a mental health provider might not be at the top of my list when I'm trying to pick up kids from school and a whole lot of other things that families do and parents do in order to maintain their families. So last but not least, we want to engage the work that providers do with families. And so at this point, right now, I'm going to ask for some technical assistance here.
Hi.
Thank
you so much. And so Sandra and Celestina wanted to get a better picture of who is out there, who is attending the webinar, and how many families on your caseloads are child welfare involved to your knowledge. So there's a little poll that just popped up in front of everybody's screens. If we can ask everybody to take a second and just click your response. If you're not sure, just take your best guess and hit the submit button at the bottom. That would help us to also just understand who is out there, how to gear some of the rest of the content that's really going to be very specific to mental health service provision with child welfare involved families. So again, if you can just click that your response, hit submit, and then once we have enough responses, we'll close out the poll and the results will pop up. So the results will pop up momentarily. I think everyone may be able to see those. Sometimes there's a short delay. Okay, thank you. So what percentage of your cases are child welfare involved? So it looks like we're kind of spread out. There are some that feel it's like about a quarter or less. Some have almost up to half. But there's a few of you that have quite a few, the majority of your cases, and then I don't think we got to hear from some of you. But thank you for participating. It seems like there's definitely providers on the line who have some connection with families who are involved with the system in some way. So I think this will really be a helpful presentation for all of you.
Okay, so, you know, I actually have another question,
Sure.
and the question is actually whether or not the family exposed that they're involved in the system, or did you get a referral, I think. So we know that they're involved, but did the family voluntarily give you that information?
So that'd be a great chat question. So if we can use our chat function, that it's on the right-hand side, and you can just submit your responses that way. So then just want to clarify, the question is, how did people come to you?
Right.
How were they referred by ACS or CPS in some way? Did the family share that information with you? How did you find out?
Yes.
Yeah. So if everyone can just take a couple minutes to use that chat function and just submit your responses, and then hit submit. Make sure you send to all presenters, and that way we can make sure to see your responses. So, while we're waiting for people to reply, it's great to hear from everybody. Sometimes there's a little bit delay for us to see the responses. We can go ahead with the presentation and just grab the feedback as it comes in.
Okay, so at this point, you should be at some ways to support child welfare involved families. The first bullet is really an important bullet, right? So the best way to support families that are involved in the child welfare system would be to be clear and honest with your information to them, and that will allow them to also be very clear and honest with the information that you need to receive from the family.
Great. So, Sandra, I just wanted to jump in real quick because some of the feedback is coming in. So it looks like people get referrals from all over. So we have some that are getting referrals from the SPOA system, others it's probation, others is CPS or preventive services. Others, they say they're self-referrals or schools, high school staff, OMH, especially if they're at our residential treatment facility. Sometimes it comes through the county level, OCFS, as well as we may have some providers who work more closely with OCFS. So I think we really have sort of the gamut, sort of that broad range of referral systems represented.
So, I mean, so what we're doing today is no matter where you get the referral from, this will allow you and assist in engaging the family in the services that you will be providing to them. I think I left off by saying that, you know, be clear and honest with information that you give to the family, and that will invite the family to be clear and honest with their answers and responding to any information that you might need. Help the family get over the stigma of being involved with ACS. So what that means to me is that, you know, they come to you either from ACS or Child Protective Services, and, you know, they may not open up to you, even though you're a mental health provider or behavioral health provider. You know, they can be as withdrawn as though you were clearly a stranger in some portion, like they've never met you before. So it's important to help families understand that being involved with child protection or ACS, the child welfare system, is something that, one, you can work through, you can get what you need, and it's really all about, you know, getting help at a time that you needed it, or maybe it's a little late, but you're actually getting help and support. Help families to get exactly what they need for their families. So although you are the mental health or behavioral health provider, you know, sometimes families come into your offices with varying degrees of I would say, lacking of various things. And sometimes it doesn't happen that they get it from the child welfare system. So if you can help to direct them resources, it would be good to have some resources available for them. And also, you know, you'd be amazed that a lot of families, you know, they do have a problem actually asking for what they need from the child welfare system once they're in contact with it, you know. So just inquiring with them, you know, about, you know, what are some of the things you need, or do you know what you could or could not ask for, or that you would receive from the child welfare system. Building protective factors. There are concrete supports. You would be one of them, considered one of the protective factors, and that's a concrete support, right? making sure that they could get the mental health services or behavioral health services that they need to help them transform their lives, and listening to whether or not they have good legal services, really, affirming that, there is some injustice, right? We don't have the perfect legal system. We don't have the perfect child welfare system. So, hearing a family say that they are not treated fairly in these systems, it's not unusual. And, to acknowledge that for a family will bring a lot of trust and engagement into whatever you're trying to do with them. And at this point, I'll move to the next slide. If you could back up for me, because, I think one of the things is that there can be lots of challenges with families that are impacted by the system and participating in mental health services. And I was about to skip over that. I'm going to let you know that right now. But I came back to it because I think it's really important. Oftentimes, families, when they come in contact with CPS or the Child Welfare System, ACS, in a conversation or in a family team meeting, part of what will go on their plan will be mental health services, behavioral health services, and it's not taken into consideration that, families actually might not know what that is. And that in itself is the first challenge right there. So even before they get to you, right, before they knock on their door after they've been mandated, you got a challenge that's coming before you because they have not been fully, it has not been fully explained what mental health services are or behavioral services are, why they are saying they should go for an assessment, what that will do for them if it can be figured out what's going on in the family. Perhaps you're functioning in this way because there is some generational reason for that, right? And some families, for the first time, either they've heard of mental health services, may never have been involved with mental health services, may never have been involved with any type of therapy sessions, talk, analyzing, any of that. They may not have ever have done that, and so it is fear. And so you would have to do a lot to help break down the barriers of fear. You will hear some families will say, well, I'm not crazy. And that's the term that's used. I'm not crazy. I don't need to go to a mental health provider. I don't need to go to therapy. I don't need behavioral health. I don't need that. We've always dealt with whatever was going on. But I think for me, what I often say is, have you dealt with it in a healthy way? And this is a way to help you deal with it in a healthy way so that you can come out, you and your kids, your family, and be in a much better place. So I know you all do a lot of talking, but there's a lot of talking that has to happen with that family to get them engaged in the services. So I mentioned protective factors and the fact that service providers are protective factors and concrete support. I said you were one of the concrete supports. That's a protective factor, and that is very true. So when I like to think about families, I don't like to think about them in risk areas. I like to think about them in protective factors and how we can help them to build these protective factors. So the first on the agenda is parental resilience, the family being strong and flexible. This is the ability to bounce back when life knocks you down. Most families don't even know that they're resilient, right? They go through their life just doing what they need to do for their families. But it's important for us to know and acknowledge it so that we can share it and so that we can see that strength. So we know that they have that protective factor under wrap. Then we have social connections. The parents need to have family and friends, right? In dealing with the child welfare system or a mental health institution, families can become withdrawn and isolated. So it's important for families that come in contact with you that this is a positive thing if they have social connections in their lives and emotional supports, and not be afraid to reach out for that. That's a sign of a healthy family. And that support can come in the form of school, community, etc. Concrete supports I won't go into again, but that's a sign of strength for the family. Knowledge of parenting and child development. Being a great parent is absolutely a protective factor. Learning about the development of your child, learning about what your child needs are, staying involved with your child's development, helping and teaching your child, learning new things for you and your family. That's another protective factor, and I will tell you that this is often overlooked by families themselves as well as any service provider they come in contact with. Social and emotional competence of children and parents in their need to help their children communicate. You know, dealing with conflict, acknowledging that, you know, there is no perfect way, but there's surely a healthier way. And most of the times families don't know that. So you may have dealt with the situation in an unhealthy manner, but you acknowledge that and then you seek out help. You know, how powerful is that, you know? And not judging the family when they might have made some decision that's not considered a healthy decision. So healthy parent-child relationship, recognizing that the relationship with your children is a relationship and that their feelings matter and their dignity matters. And again, you know, sometimes you don't realize what you do, what you say, but when you do realize what you did and what you've said has somehow changed that person, just the acknowledgement of that is a protective factor. So this is what I've highlighted for you in understanding how to engage families in receiving services from you as a provider. So we can go to the next slide. The next slide will cover parents' rights. And I believe you have an obligation to inform parents that they have rights. And it sounds like, wow, they don't know they have rights. Well, the system can do a lot to strip you of those rights or the feeling of not having those rights. So, you know, inform the families that they have rights. They have rights not to lose their children because they're poor. They have the right to services and supports in raising their children. They have a right to speak for themselves and be heard. They have a right to be informed of their rights. You know, in hospitals, there's advocacy units and patient rights units. The same is true for families involved with the system. They have a right to a fair hearing. They shouldn't have their rights limited in any way. They have a right to quality legal services. And they have a right to receive supports from anyone who has been affected or in the slide who has walked in their shoes. And they have a right to have their children returned to them as quickly as possible and or placed with someone whom they trust to have care of their child. They have a right to frequent and meaningful contact with their child. They have a right to have a say in the decision-making. and I'm not saying parents at the beginning of every bullet point, but again, parents have the right. Parents have a right to privacy. And what does that mean, right? That means not having their family situation or interactions discussed with everyone, even colleagues. And that's on the list because that has happened, and we've talked to parents. Everything that's on this list was generated by parents. They have a right to fair treatment, regardless of race, culture, gender, and religion. We find that a lot of families come in contact with the child welfare system, and, you know, their culture is misunderstood, their religion is misunderstood, and it's important to take the time to learn about the family that you've come in contact with, about what their beliefs are. Of course, the supports to reunify with their children, a lifelong relationship with their children, irregardless to whether or not they are adopted, living with someone else. When necessary, if possible, and there is no issues with the child, we have a responsibility to help families have a relationship and stay connected. And I'll give you an example, just like right now in, sure everyone has seen it, it's across the country where you have youth that they don't have a connected person. I mean, I have to say that's irresponsible of the system, right? So, you know, we're seeing that now, that youth want to be connected. It doesn't matter who it is. It's, you know, it's an adult in their life who can help to influence them and guide them throughout their life. So that's just an example. Parents have a right to meaningful participation in developing the child welfare policies and practices that affect their families and communities. Wow, that's a big one. So, yes. So absolutely, they have a right to influence that. I think we can move on to the next slide. And I'd like to just talk about available supports for families. And also, I didn't mention, I say families because for me, families are mom and dad, dad and dad, mom and mom, mom, or just dad. Or aunt, or whoever it is, to me, is family. But for the sake of the child welfare system, it's important to mention the importance of fathers, because often families are in situations where there is no acknowledgement that there's a father involved. And I think it's really important that we not forget about the fathers, we not forget about the grandparents, and that we not forget about caregivers of support. It's really important that we keep that at the forefront as well. So available supports for families. A support for me and parents that come into the Child Welfare Organizing Project, these are the things that are supports for them when they're going through the child welfare system, and can be supports to them even after they've been reunited with their children, or even after they've had an adoption or went through a termination of their rights. These are supports that are still essential. And the first I have is community organizing. And community organizing can mean a lot of different things, but in this regard, it is being involved with your community, organizing others to know about the child welfare system. That can be an empowering tool. Parent support and healing, being in a space with others who have been affected by the system, sharing your stories and sharing what has given you strength to get through the contact you've had with the child welfare system and the stigma of being involved with the child welfare system. Parent leadership. Parent leadership is also essential. We have a parent leadership curriculum at the Child Welfare Organizing Project, in which parents are trained about the history of the child welfare system. And they can then go out and share that information with their community and other parents, or eventually become a parent advocate, helping other parents who become involved with the child welfare system navigate the child welfare system. A parent advocate network. In this case, it's a parent advocate network in child welfare. And that is a network of support for parent advocates so that they can come and talk about the things they face in the child welfare system as they're working in various entities. Peer-to-peer contact, again, someone who has been affected. Other community-based organizations for social change is important for families and parents involved with the child welfare system to get involved with. There are a few in New York City, and also in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie. Community Voices Heard, Parents in Action is in New York City, Fostering Progressive Advocacy is in New York City, and of course volunteer opportunities at any community-based organization is essential to a strong family and strong parents. And let's not forget telling your story. There's Rise Magazine, in which parents write stories, and they publish Rise Magazine. And it is a publication. I know I have magazine, but it's a publication by parents. And I've been asked to move on to discussion.
Well, we have an opportunity now to get some feedback from folks. So there's a couple discussion questions up. What are some specific challenges you've had in engaging child welfare involved families? And we also have, how have you been able to support child welfare involved families specifically? So it'd be helpful, I think, for all of us to hear sort of what are some of those specific challenges. Use that chat box on the lower side. I think we've been getting lots of feedback and comments that way, so please go ahead and use that chat box to submit any specific issues or questions. What are some common challenges that you tend to see, especially for those of you who tend to work with child welfare involved families very often? And had given opportunity for Sandra and Celestina to really reply back and apply. I think both of you have done an amazing job of giving us some specific strategies and ways of thinking and approaching families, and also just our role as mental health providers, which is what really struck me as protective factor, and that we also have a responsibility to inform our families of the rights that they also may not be aware of, so that we also serve a purpose in that way as well. So let's just take a minute for folks to submit your questions. And again, what are some specific challenges you've had in engaging child welfare involved families? I saw many of you letting us know how referrals are coming in. Some of you are working in a variety of different settings, outpatient, inpatient, residential. So I think there's some peers out there as well. So please take a minute to submit some of those questions. Okay, so please go ahead and submit some of those questions. I think what we'll do is we're waiting for some folks to type in. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay before it gets to us. We're going to kind of move ahead, and there's some questions that we also have sort of populated from feedback from all of you through our webinars around some specific challenges. So I do have a couple coming in that I can point out, Sandra. So attendance to outpatient treatment is a barrier when mandated by child welfare. Do you have any suggestions around supporting and improving families in that way?
I think the way to support and improve families, if they're mandated, I think it's important for the service, the provider, to be near them if possible, and also asking whether or not, if it's a person of color, you might want to find out culturally whether or not they're comfortable with going to a person who does not look like them. That can be a help in the treatment. And then also understanding that they have a life, right? So whatever appointments that need to be made, you have to kind of think about what the family schedule is. I think that that's always a barrier because oftentimes appointments are set up without the consultation of the family, excuse me, and you're told to be at this place at this time, and that can even be for the initial assessment. So the parent has, the family has no engagement into what time, what day they might need to be at your office.
Great, thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
And we have another question that basically highlights that sort of the feelings that the families have around child welfare involvement get in the way of the work that needs to be done to move away from that involvement. So I'm wondering if you have a response to that, and especially in the experience in working with families.
So I think, you know, it's funny because we deal with that very thing, I think, at Child Welfare Organizing Project as we go through the self-healing, the parent healing group, right? Because parents come in, they've been affected, and they want to share it. You know, you got to let them get it out because you got to let them get it out so that they can move forward. And you know what? It's okay to say, you know what, Sandra, today you can just spill it. You can just spill it. So not being judgmental, but just let them spill it, talk about it, and say, you know what, I know we'll go back to that every now and again, but it's important that we have to move on. So, but just acknowledging that they have to share those feelings with you.
And I would also kind of piggyback on something that we have presented in the previous webinar, so you may also want to check out our website for some of those slides. But it's also, so why is that getting in the way? And so it goes back to something that Sandra, you said in the beginning around having a conversation, orienting people to the services, but also what are the challenges and the barriers? What are past experiences, or have there been negative past experiences with any of the systems that then gets in the way of engagement that then is why they're kind of, as you had mentioned, sort of stuck around their child welfare involvement or have the negative feelings around that prevents them from moving forward. So what is the discussion that we as providers need to have to engage, to process those feelings, to talk about those negative past experiences? How can we orient families and build mental health literacy and help them to move forward? Are we attending to their felt needs in the mental health services? Maybe there's a disconnect because they don't feel that it actually is aligning well. So having some of those discussions may be helpful to move past those plateaus or those areas where we tend to get stuck with families. So please keep some of those coming. I think there's also a mention around a lack of match or representativeness ethnically or racially in working with families that sometimes gets in the way. So please keep submitting those. I do want to ask, though, what have you done that has been supportive? Have you utilized any specific engagement techniques when working with a child welfare involved family that has really helped to support them in the services? Have you done things a little bit of a different way or figured out that you needed to do it a little bit of a different way specifically for these families? So please submit those. I want to highlight a couple other key questions that we've received in feedback, and I'm just going to pull those up now as common areas in which we as mental health providers intersect with child welfare involved families. And I think from the other webinars, these are the common scenarios that always popped up when we were talking about engagement. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to approach families when working with both the biological family and the foster family together. So as a mental health provider, sometimes we're providing mental health services both to the child in their current environment in the foster family, but also bringing in the biological family as well, especially if they're on the path to reunification. And that oftentimes has been challenging, especially if you can't get both sides on the same page. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for providers when they are in that situation with families?
So the recommendation that I would have for providers in those situations is that, you know, both families are important to the process, to the work that you need to do as a provider. Both families deserve equal privacy and discussion about how you need to help with the reunification of the family. Often, the foster parent or the parent, can be either one, will not want either one there. So, and so that's a challenge, right? But I think as a provider, it's important to let both know why they're there and how everyone, including the provider, is there to help move the family process forward, you know, so that the child can eventually be reunited with the family. And, you know, it's really a co-parenting process. Foster parents and parents don't always get that message. And I know that's strange, but they don't always get that message. It hasn't been too long of a time where actually parents and foster parents are really meeting and talking and engaging with each other. So as providers, you also have a responsibility to help that happen and to dismiss either side that you might hear having negative thoughts about the other, because both are important and essential in the health of the child.
Great, thank you so much, Sandra. How about when we're, so I think for many of the providers they probably have families that maybe aren't that deeply involved in the system, but may have an open case. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they are in the process of needing to make a report, or there was a recent report made. Any suggestions or recommendations about how to continue engaging and working with those families in those circumstances, or anything that maybe we as providers should know?
So I think as a provider, and I'll start with the provider who may have to make a report, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that if you are a provider, and I think this can go across the board, I just have to say that if you are open and honest with the family, you'd be surprised that you having to make that report is something that you actually can do with them together. And I know that sounds strange, right? But that's the truth. The truth of it is that as you're engaging that family and things are coming up, you have to be open and honest with the family about what it is and why there is a need for you to make that report. I think once that happens, it's just easier. One of the things about the system is that it doesn't lend to that, so we kind of have to make it happen. And I think that's really important to do, and it can happen because families, you think families really know why they might be a candidate for child welfare or to have a call? They don't know. They don't know. They can be doing some of the simplest things like leave their kid home, right? You think they know. They don't know. So I would say just be open and honest about what you see that's a concern for you and why you might have to take that next step.
Yeah, so transparency in the process is really important. How about, before we kind of move on, I have two questions. One is sort of the typical case of that there's a sort of ongoing monitoring, but they're with their biological family. They have this caseworker that pops up every once in a while. Any suggestions around working with those families that would be helpful for providers to know?
No, I think, you know, again, it just goes with the honesty. What's the feeling of the family and having that ongoing monitoring? What are some of the things that they can continue to do to make sure that their family is healthy and stable, to make sure that once that monitoring is over that they don't come back? And just knowing that it's a process, and the hope is that it's going to end. But be involved, be engaged, be proactive in the process, be able to talk about what your feelings are with having someone monitor your family, and know that even once families are actually reunified, that they don't sometimes get, most of the time, they don't get what they need in order to help them adjust to that process of reunification. So that's also important, is that, yes, it's you know, it's wonderful to be back with your family, but you also have been away from each other for months on end. So acknowledging that in itself can be a stressful period as you're working with families towards reunification, that it's not, you don't come back the same, if I can best explain it. You just don't come back as a unit the same. I don't care if your kid has been gone for a week or a year. You just don't come back the same, because that natural bond to protect has been broken from the family and the community. So, you know, acknowledging that and helping families adjust to it may not be the same.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because it would be helpful for providers to explain those experiences, that what you made, that the feelings, the anxieties, this that you don't know how to be around each other kind of feeling is something that mental health providers can help to normalize for these families. That this is what it feels like, and it makes sense that you're feeling that way. So let's try to think through what will help your family to come back together and work better together. And it's going to be a process.
Yes.
So sharing some of those kinds of suggestions and building on those protective factors, I think, is particularly important, and highlighting those rights going back. So it sounds like some reorientation into rights, both on the child welfare side, but also in terms of mental health services may be helpful as post-reunification.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have one more question that came in from somebody. So any recommendations on engaging juvenile justice-involved families?
Can I tell you that they're the same? They're absolutely the same. I think the difference with juvenile justice is, well, you're dealing with youth, right? Most of the time, they're at a certain age, but it's truly just the same. It's the same process. It's helping the family get the tools to deal with a youth that's been involved with juvenile justice. It's talking out all of that involvement and what that looks like for the family. It's just the same. It's non-judging. We could go down the list again, but I think that what we've talked about today can be used across the board with any family you come in contact with that's dealing with any system.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. We want to take just 2 more minutes to kind of wrap up. And Sandra, I know you had a couple 4 key points you wanted to get across. Do you want to present those, and then I'll move to wrap up and sort of next steps?
Okay. So the 4 key points are engagement strategies for mental health providers, what you can do to support and collaborate with families. Number 1, always communicate the strength of the family. Number 2, include families in discussions and planning. Number 3, help families gather information about mental health needs. And number 4, which is probably number 1, assessment of the family. Do not judge. And I think that will go a long way with helping with engagement. Things that mental health, yes, I think that'll go a long way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I just want to take a minute to thank both Sandra and Celestina for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us and share their information, their experience, and their expertise with you. Feel free to reach out to them and to us through CTAC as well around any additional questions or comments you have. A feedback survey will pop up at the end of the webinar. So let us know if you'd like to hear more about this topic. Let us know if there's something specific or a nuance in which we can then maybe work with both Sandra and Celestina to provide some additional resources or information to you. Sandra took the time to kind of create a list of websites, and here in particular, CWOP's website, www.cwop.org is a wonderful website. I saw it just got redone, it looks like, yes. And it looks amazing with a wealth of information, toolkit, resources, and it's based out of New York City. However, I think there's a lot of information there that could apply, especially around the rights and the resources for families across the state. In addition, we have some other here that may be helpful for you. The webinar recording and slides will be on www.ctacny.com. And I just want to jump to our remaining webinars. Our next consultation webinar, as I mentioned, will be an opportunity for participants to have Q&A with the presenters from the previous webinars, and that's Wednesday, April 15th from 12 to 1. So you have a little bit of time between now and then to kind of think through how would you implement some of these engagement strategies, both from our last webinar or this current one, and have an opportunity to talk with us with some specific challenges, case studies, things like that you think would be helpful to know from us. Thank you, everybody, for participating. You were a very active group in our discussion and feedback. Please take the time to complete that feedback survey. This is Sandra's contact information and mine, Lydia Franco, through CTAC. Feel free to reach us. Have a great day. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.